Newsflash, Dr. Anthony Fauci himself admits that the new COVID-19 variations in England and South Africa and Brazil in particular do make the vaccines less effective in his first news conference at the White House. He also admits that monoclonal antibodies and the current therapeutics are less effective against them. He, of course, tried to minimize the implications of that, and he used words like concern and concerning and so forth to toward verbally minimizing the impact of those things. But in this session, we are going to investigate that. I will give you the transcript of the original remarks by him and also the newest studies that have come out the week and a half since then. This is all fairly new. It's all happened within the last couple of weeks. But what we are beginning to understand is not only are these new mutations or variants, as they call them, again, another euphemism, of the COVID-19 virus more deadly and more transmissible, but they are more resistant to therapies and more resistant to these vaccines as well. So again, the reason why that I'm bringing this out is not to create alarmism by any means. What we do know amidst all of this is that the best approach in terms of foundation of health is to allow ourselves to be as healthy as we can and as fortified and as strengthened as we can in beginning to deal with this. Because the possibility is arising that this, as I showed in my other video, likely now, even with mainstream science, is admitting this, lab-created virus or lab-originated virus is kind of destroying all the laws of natural transmission and natural infection, which creates equilibrium. And now we have an artificial virus that is now becoming more deadly and more transmissible. And it's also beginning to mutate in ways that even our current vaccines and even people who have gotten the virus before, and this is, we see it with Brazil, and even reached herd immunity before, as we saw with Manaus, Brazil, may not protect you in the future. So this opens up an important thing, not as fear, but recognizing the reality of this and understanding how to enhance us to be able to meet these new challenges. So that's what we're going to talk about here, how these variants or mutations do or don't, where they have spread, how resistant they are to these new therapies and vaccines, and what ways there might be going forward. So let me go ahead and put myself in the corner here, and we'll go right to the here we go. Let me move that up a little bit. We'll go right to the Fauci article here. I just got this off rev.com. It's the actual video conference, but also the transcript of it. And I went down to the relevant and underreported, frankly, part of this. Here's what he says at just before the 4-minute mark. He says, the mutants in the UK, meaning the mutant strains of this COVID-19 virus, which we know are in about 20 plus states, that's the United States, and I'll show a map of that. The mutants that we're seeing in South Africa and Brazil, first of all, we need to understand that RNA viruses like coronaviruses mutate all the time. Again, I'm trying to make you calm. Most of the mutations don't have any physiological relevance with regard to the function of the virus itself. But guess what, Dr. Fauci? These do. So again, Dr. Fauci says, quote, however, every once in a while you get mutations, either singly or clustered in combinations, which do have an impact. So what have we learned thus far? And I want to emphasize thus far because we're paying very, very careful attention to this and we take it very seriously. At least from the experience that our colleagues in the UK have had, the one that is in the UK, that is the mutation, COVID-19 mutation, appears to have a greater degree of transmissibility, about twice as much as what we call the wild type original virus. The one that is in South Africa is a bit different, and I'll get to that in a second. So it does look like it increases the transmissibility. They say correctly on a one-to-one basis, it doesn't seem to make the virus more virulent or have a greater chance of making you seriously ill or killing you. However, we shouldn't be lulled into complacency about that, because if you have a virus that is more transmissible, you're going to get more cases. And when you get more cases, you're going to get more hospitalizations. And when you get more hospitalizations, you're ultimately going to get more deaths. As we will see in the next slide, transmissibility is a much more important factor. Because if it can blow through an important population easily, the curve goes up a lot farther than just increasing the deadliness. Now, it turns out, and I will show this, that subsequent to his press conference, which happened on, let's see here, January 21st, okay? Subsequent to that, and we're only about a week and a half out now, they have now confirmed that it is more deadly. The UK variant is more deadly, 30% or so estimated more deadly, as well as about twice as transmissible, which is amplifying the deadliness exponentially, as well as increasing it by a multiplier. So Dr. Fauci continues at the 5-minute, 17-second mark. So even though the virus on a one-to-one basis isn't more serious, that's proven to be false, actually. It's now on a one-to-one basis more serious, okay? Going on, the phenomena of a more transmissible virus is something that you take seriously. The next thing is, does it change enough to interfere with the efficacy of a whole group of monoclonal antibodies that many of us are aware of? The monoclonal antibodies that are being used for treatment in some cases and prevention. Since monoclonal antibodies bind to a very specific part of the virus, when there's a mutation there, it has a much greater chance of obliterating the efficacy of a monoclonal antibody. So if there's a mutation at the attachment site of this monoclonal antibody, it could say goodbye to the efficacy or seriously diminish the efficacy. And we're seeing in the much concerning mutations that are in South Africa and in some respects Brazil, which is similar to South Africa, that is having an effect on the monoclonal antibodies. In other words, I'm getting away from Fauci again, they are mutating on the outside in such a way that these monoclonal antibodies cannot bind with them and therefore are not effective at reducing them or destroying them or inactivating them. Continuing with Fauci. The real question that people are clearly interested in is this, and is, what is the impact on the vaccine? And so far, literally, we have found this new phenomena that are preprint journals where people get data and they put it into a preprint server where it hasn't been yet peer-reviewed. But you have to pay attention to it because it gives you good information. Ultimately, it gets confirmed. So he's basically saying, listen, these aren't peer-reviewed publications yet, but we have concerning indications that it does have he's implying that it does have an effect on the vaccine's efficacy. So we'll continue. And we're seeing them coming out over the next few days. And what they're saying is that what we likely will be seeing is a diminution, more South Africa than UK. UK, that diminution in what would be the efficacy of the vaccine-induced antibodies. Diminution means that's a lessened response. And that's what we have right now. More in the South Africa and the Brazilian one than in the UK, but nonetheless, and we will look into that. Now continuing with Fauci. Now that does not mean that the vaccines will not be effective, and let me explain why. There's a thing called a cushion effect. So if you have a vaccine like the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine that can suppress the virus at a dilution, let's say 1 to 1,000, and the mutant influence it by bringing it down to maybe 1 to 800 or something like that, you're still well above the line of not being effective. So there's that cushion, and even though it's diminished somewhat, it's still effective. So he's basically saying, you made the virus 20%, the vaccine 20% less effective, it still has some effect in helping your body learn how to deal with this virus, okay? Again, we're going to look more into it, but nonetheless, let's say if that cushion goes all the way down to 50% or 40 or 30%, then it is more or less useless. And this is something that was found in a lot of these flu vaccines that get as low as 0% effective with these nasally introduced ones. They had a mist that went up in the nose that two of them were 0%, but as low as 10 and 20% effectiveness for the same reason. Viruses mutate. So continuing. That's what we're seeing both certainly with the UK, which has very minimal effect. We're following very carefully the one in South Africa, which is a little more concerning, but nonetheless not something that we don't think we can handle. Now, whether we think we can handle it or not is not the issue. Whether you actually can is the issue. And finally, we'll finish it up. Dr. Fauci at the 7:48 mark. What is the message? Because someone could say, now, wait a minute. If you have the possibility that the vaccines are diminishing in their impact, why are we vaccinating people? No, it's all the more reason why we should be vaccinating as many people as you possibly can, because as long as a virus is out there replicating, viruses don't mutate unless they replicate. And if you can suppress that by a very good vaccine campaign, then you could actually avoid this deleterious effect you could get from the mutations. Bottom line, we're paying very close attention to it. There are alternative plans. If we ever have to modify the vaccine, that's not something that is a very onerous thing. We can do that given the platforms we have. But right now, from the reports we have, literally as of today, it appears that the vaccines will still be effective against them. With the caveat in mind, you want to pay close attention to it. So, Jen, why don't you just stop here and then maybe we'll just answer some questions on anything else I said. So he ends his initial presentation there, but he's basically saying they have alternate plans. They are well aware that these vaccines, as well as these monoclonal therapies, will work, especially if we have several other mutations that take it into the out of the range of these receptors fitting or working at all. And here's my concern. What if you keep introducing vaccine after vaccine for an old virus? We already know with flu vaccines that the more and more vaccines that you get, the more your overall immune response over time is actually diminished. They did this with children, and they found out in the Marshfield Clinic in Wisconsin that if a child had taken a flu vaccine within the last 5 years, their immune response to a new form, a new mutation, was actually diminished over someone who hadn't taken those vaccines. So there is something about the innate immune system and the naturally created immunity that seems much more responsive and robust and can be either distracted or dispersed or somehow neutralized by vaccines. Now, of course, the vaccine industry and others don't want to get that out there because they're like, well, we're not going to get herd immunity if people are individually thinking about their own immunity to this disease. And he is right. If we could cram through all this, on one hand, he's right, all these vaccines and get them into everybody's arms tomorrow, these vaccines would go against the non-mutated viruses and keep them from transmitting, incubating, and then beginning to mutate, especially in unhealthy people, by the way. But we don't have that. What we do is we have unhealthy people, and it takes a while to develop these, and we're not even sure of the efficacy of this program. So if anything, we're now spreading it out and allowing each one of these viruses to mutate more in response to vaccines in unhealthy bodies to create even more vigorous forms, as we're already seeing, that are more virulent or deadly and that transmit more. So we're actually educating them, those viruses, how to become more effective. And it's an open question as to whether the vaccine, especially as it's spread out over time, especially in unhealthy people, if that's actually educating them as much or more. Now, I'm not going to fall down on one side or the other. I do believe vaccines can be immune therapy. They can teach the body, but we have to be very careful. And there are very new forms of vaccines that we've never tried before, and they do have essential risks to them. And in most cases, I've said that you have to you understand your risk profile, your age profile. These vaccines aren't even approved, even for emergency use, for children under 16. The reason for that is it really doesn't affect them. Their innate immune system, their response to this is mild. We had 25,000 plus cases of coronavirus in children under the age of 18 in California by mid-July. Not a single death among them. And precious few across the United States. It's just simply not a risk because the profile of children or their immune response to it is adequate, okay? So now that changes when you're 80 and more. You're 80 and more, and you're in relatively robust health, but you have some risk factors involved, because I've tried this in really severely on the edge old people. And in that case, the strain of the vaccine itself might actually push you over the edge. But let's say you're relatively healthy and there is and you have some risk factors and you're above 80, then it makes a lot more sense, okay? So one has to really attend to this. And for the most part, people are getting the vaccine are above age of 65, they're healthcare workers with larger exposure and so forth and so on. We still don't know the long-term efficacy of these vaccines. We don't really know about the dangers either because they were such accelerated trials. So all of that will remain to be seen. But we do know, and we do know right now, and we have data right now, and this is what this video is going to be. We do know that there is a diminishing effectiveness of these vaccines against the COVID-19 mutations and against the therapies like monoclonal antibodies. And Fauci just admitted it. He just tried to soft sell it. He said, it's concerning, it's concerning. Well, we're going to see about how concerning it is, okay? We're going to go right to the data and that Fauci's not going to share with you. First of all, here's the deal, okay? The transmissibility of the virus is in many ways much more deadly than simply how virulent or how fatal something is in terms of deadly it is health-wise to an individual, okay? Here's the reason why. And I'll go down here and this pretty much states straight, it puts a graph to it. With a variant that's 30% more deadly, the same number of infections will occur, but that will lead to 1,300 deaths. On a one-to-one basis, if you have something that's 30% more deadly, then you'll have 130% more deaths with people, with an individual that's exposed, with individuals who are exposed. So if you started with 1,000 deaths, you'd go up to 1,300 deaths. Yet with a variant that is 30% more transmissible, but not more deadly, both cases will grow exponentially. The eventual death toll over the same period stretches to over 4,200. Do you see that? It quadruples because of the exponential rate of transmission. You're exposing a lot more people in a lot shorter time, causing a lot more death. As we saw with the initial graphs of the COVID-19, especially in New York and New Jersey, it was huge. It went way over hospital capacity and so forth, a lot of death in a very short amount of time. What we're seeing now with these new variants is that their transmissivity is increasing about twice and the virulence or deadliness is increasing 30%. So you're basically combining those two things, and that's not good. It's not just 30% more transmissible, it's more like 60% more transmissible or 70% more transmissible. So we're talking about a virus that is now going to be very much, and Osterholm himself said on Biden's advisory group, that the next 6 to 14 weeks are going to be, between 6 and 14 weeks are going to be, if these variants take off, it's going to be crazy. So definitely prepare for this. This is a map of where all these variants are currently surfacing. Again, this map is, what date is this? February 1st. So we're talking within a few days here, folks. These are the green ones that are the UK variant, okay? So that's about half the states. The Brazilian variant is in South Carolina and in and now I guess now Maryland. It just took up, and then finally Minnesota, I believe, has the South African variant, or is it the other way around? Let's see here. Let's look at here. UK and Brazilian variants. Okay, that's yellow, and UK and South African variants, those are red. So the South African ones have reached South Carolina and Maryland, and the Brazilian one has reached Minnesota, as well as them both having the UK ones as well. Okay, so we're already well into this. All right, and this thing, because it's about twice as transmittable, at least 60 to 70%, that's just for the UK virus, and we'll see other research on this. We're going to have another huge kick up in cases here. You have to understand, only in terms of identified cases or exposure, let's get rid of that. In terms of that, identified cases and exposure, they're still only reported about 1/10 of our population has been contacted. So at least we're only accounting for that much. So let's look at this. Boris Johnson, this is back. So the variant is up to 70% more transmissible than earlier versions. This is a New York Times article. This happened in January 4th. So this is about a month ago. But here's what was important about this. I'm going down. Where did I? I think I showed. Oh, All right. I didn't. What was interesting about this, I thought I had went ahead and highlighted part here. Oh, there it is. Faster transmission means more cases, which will lead to more hospitalizations and fatalities. So he's going ahead and seeing that. They created lockdowns on this one. There is now evidence that it's more lethal. Their chief scientific advisor didn't think it was at the time. This is only a month ago. And let me see if I can find anything else. Yeah. Well, I think we can just move on to the next one. New Yorker magazine. The new COVID-19 variant sends Britain into crisis and talks about the lockdown. Again, this gets to some issues around how to deal with this economically. We can't hide from it, it seems. Okay. And again, I would say that we need to start really looking at fortifying our own health, needing to know what natural things that each one of us can do to fortify our response individually, weaponize us, as I said in my other one, against the virus, have us evolve and adapt. And through lifestyle changes, not mutate per se, but have a much more effective response. Use our intelligence to do that. Because if these things keep changing and mutating, and they keep moving ahead and diminishing the effectiveness of vaccines and the effectiveness of therapies, at a certain point we have to say, hey, we need to protect ourselves. We can't just look for the cops to come in and save us, i.e. vaccines. We have to be able to protect ourselves. Again, in this case, we don't need any huge drug or defense. We have things that we can do directly. I've talked about this in previous videos, the supplements that can be taken. Again, none of this is medical advice. You should go ahead and research this and fully render it a choice for yourself. Okay, we can do things we know work. Sleep really works. Hydration really works. Being out in the sun and being outside really works. Exercise works, as well as these various supplements, as well as a whole food, plant-based, organic diet really works. It's not coincidental that literally everything that works against this virus includes hugely increasing our own health and saving trillions of dollars of health costs. So why don't we use this as an inducement to improve our health and have all these other benefits, as well as allow us to effectively compete with these mutating viruses? So here is the relevant thing that I'm putting in. The past Monday, English Chief Medical Officer Chris Whitty told the BBC that next few weeks are going to be the worst weeks of this pandemic in terms of hospital admissions. In England alone, he said 30,000 people are hospitalized with the virus compared with 18,000 during the April, that is the initial peak. So we're having a much greater peak with this new mutation. More hospitalizations because it's more transmissible and more deadly, as it turns out. Okay, and traditional therapies have not been used against it. Now, this is different than supplements, and different than things like ivermectin and what was the other one? There were several others. Hydrocortisone or whatever, the dexamethasone, which is a corticosteroid, anti-inflammatory. These things still work because they address the effects of it and the body's ability to buffer and deal with the assault, okay? Actual therapies are those targeted toward the actual receptors of these particular viruses. And if those receptors change through mutation, then they become much less effective. And vaccines work by preparing the body to recognize these various surface receptors. And again, if the new mutations cause those receptors or those attachment sites, those spike proteins to change, they may miss it, and furthermore, may actually complicate and diminish the body's immune response by having them look around for yesterday's news, for the old virus, as well as having to contend with the new one. And I wish there was more discussion about that. Do too many vaccines and therapies poured into the body diminish the effective response to someone who is not doing that to new mutations? That's a legitimate scientific question. It's not a scare tactic that says, oh, we should avoid vaccines because it might disperse our ability to meet new mutations. It's an open question. I think we should study it. okay? We already know from flu vaccines that flu vaccines can diminish your immune response to subsequent diseases. We already saw, and I showed this in a separate video, that the elderly mortality, flu-related mortality, increased in a study with people who were vaccinated from the flu. And my hypothesis, and I have not proven this, and I don't see studies that have, but there are studies that have proved the increase in mortality, is that if you put too many different types of artificial stimulants to immune response in the form of vaccines to past viruses, and not have your body develop its own system, as it were, to tailor toward recognizing those, that you may be overwhelming or displacing the body's ability to actually meet, recognize, and develop effective, customized immune responses. So that's a good hypothetical hypothesis and basis for study. I would really like to see that study done. We have some indications that there is an effect, but we don't know why the effect is happening exactly. That's just a theory on my part about why that might be happening. Again, this confirms coronavirus UK variant may be more deadly. This is the 22nd of January, so this is right after Fauci's talk, okay? They're not confirming it, but all of a sudden they said previous work suggests that the new variant spreads between 30 and 70% faster than others, and there are hints that it's a 30% more deadly. So we're getting the evidence in that this is happening, and we can't ignore it. Michael Osterholm, who is on Biden's task force, and he's a guy I respect quite a bit. He's an epidemiologist. An epidemiologist is one who is one who understands the spread of disease, essentially, and is an expert on the spread of disease, okay? And the statistics around that. I respect him. He's a no BSer, okay? He's a pretty talker, and here's what he said. He says the variant found in the UK could become the dominant US strain and prompt a surge in cases and fresh lockdowns, okay? Like I said, he's an advisor on the Biden transition team. He said the variant could trigger a massive US surge in cases within 6 to 14 weeks. And if that happens, we're going to see something that we have not yet seen in this country. So he's predicting an even bigger bump, okay? And he says, and I quote, the surge that is likely to occur with this new variant from England is going to happen in the next 6 to 14 weeks. He says, if this happens, we're going to see something we have not yet seen in this country. So buckle up. And now Forbes is also talking about the new COVID strain having some issues with regard to spread and with regard to our ability to hospitalize people effectively. They said the UK is now averaging 60,000 new cases a day after averaging just 15,000 cases a day at the start of December. We're talking a quadrupling in cases. Can you imagine a quadrupling in cases and deaths in our country? Quadrupling from the height of just over 4,000 deaths for us would be on the order of 16,000 deaths per day. And the amount of cases that we're getting per day is just, was 25, I think it was about 25,000 or something. It was a pretty large, some of them were over 100,000 cases per day. If you quadruple that, you're getting up to 100,000 or 400,000, even 500,000 in the United States. Like this said, it's spreading through her. I gave you the map already. Uncontrolled spread, vaccine rollout. Again, this vaccine, this is what happened in England. Okay, look what happened to cases here. Just went off the charts. Okay. 56%, that's how much more transmittable the new strain may be compared to the old ones, according to a study from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So again, 56, 60, 70%, but significantly higher in terms of transmissibility. Here we have, it's taking time to load here. Minnesota confirms the first known US case of the more contagious COVID variant, originally found in Brazil. Again, caused by someone traveling there. And here's why this is important, and this is not to be underestimated. This is why scientists are very worried about the variant from Brazil. This is also from NPR. It's not exactly a fringe source by any means, National Public Radio. And here's a relevant quote. For some scientists, the most worrying variant might be the newest one, a variant called P1, which emerged in early December in Manaus, Brazil, and by mid-January had already caused a massive resurgence in cases across the city of 2 million people. So we have a huge sample size here, okay? On Monday, officials detected the first confirmed case of P1 in the U.S., specifically in Minnesota. The State Department of Health picked up the case by randomly sequencing 50 nasal swabs. So again, these are very, very small percentage of people being tested in this country. Sometimes as little as 0.3% up to 1%. So when you happen upon one, especially if it's community spread, it's not directly tied to travel. I think this one was, but now all of a sudden you're thinking this is much, much bigger. Why is this concerning? What is it about Manaus, Brazil that is really, really concerning? Here's what it is. And this is from The Lancet, one of the top scientific peer-reviewed journals in the world, okay? And it says resurgence of COVID-19 in Manaus, Brazil, despite high seroprevalence. Seroprevalence means the prevalence or the presence in your blood of certain antibodies, right? Or antigens or evidence that you've been infected. Here's why this is so concerning. In Manaus, Brazil, a study of blood donors indicated that the population had been infected with SARS-CoV-2, the original form, by October 2020. High attack rates of SARS-CoV-2 were also estimated in populations in other places. Iquitos, Peru, at 70% and so forth. In Manaus, so many people got infected in Manaus that they literally reached above the theoretical herd immunity threshold. So they should have been over it, okay? And this is exactly what happened. They literally, if you look at this chart here, these two charts, a lot of people, COVID-19 hospitalizations and excess deaths, they followed each other pretty much. And for about 6 or 7 months, they had reached herd immunity. Almost everybody got infected. About 70% of the people got infected. And now look what's happened. Bam. Hospitalizations have skyrocketed well past the maximum with this new mutation. Remember, your natural immune system generally tends to be better than a vaccine when it comes to confronting this. It also eliminates a lot of the people who had underlying conditions. They had died or hospitalized. So they're removed from the population. So we have a generally healthier population that has already experienced this, and not just experienced it, but experienced it with their natural immune system response for the most part, since vaccines hadn't really been administered or developed very much there, which is generally speaking superior, if you don't die from it, than the immune response from the artificial ones, the ones lab-created ones. But now, even with that natural response, even with the fact that they reach herd immunity, this new mutation is acting almost as a completely different virus. It's like flu seasons again. Here's our first flu, right? Of course, it's a lot deadlier, right? Now the virus has mutated over this period of time, reintroduced itself into the population almost as a new virus with a new receptors on its spike proteins, and is now actually deadlier and spreading again. If this continues to repeat itself, we are going to really need to focus on, like I said, weaponizing ourselves. I mean, when I say weaponizing, I'm using that in a somewhat humorous, but also serious way. We need to fortify our body ability to adapt whatever virus comes down the pike, and we need to study the effects of vaccines and therapeutics, and whether or not they set us up for long-term success or they diminish our immune response long-term. And even worse than that, if they give us antibody-dependent enhancement or amplification, which is sometimes what can happen with vaccines that can literally amplify your body's inflammatory response and make you less able to deal with subsequent viruses. These are not small questions. Mainstream science would try to say, oh, no, it's okay, there's just a small part of the population. That's bull. We already have the studies that show that is. And everyone else would say, don't do any masks and don't do any vaccines at all, are ignoring that the vaccine may be helpful, one, to prime your body or educate your body, and two, especially for high-risk populations that are very old, it may be beneficial for them to trade off. For the most part, anyone who's young or under 18, first of all, the vaccines aren't even clear for them, even for emergency use, and their systems seem to be able to handle it. It looks like this virus is going ahead and wiping out a lot of the older population. The younger population has a very high innate immunity, low in acquired immunity. The older population is very high in acquired immunity, but their innate immunity and innate immune response has waned. Again, it's my theory, not proven at this point, that there's something about the innate immunity system of young people, immune system of young people, and the way it responds that's much more effective about engaging this virus. And here's another theory that I had based on my last video having to do with the lab originated and artificial nature of this virus. Innate immunity is much more naturally driven. All right? It's from nature. It's what you were born with, what you brought into this world. It gets educated along the line as it goes against natural viruses. If you start putting vaccines into there, your acquired immunity has an artificial influence. And I'm wondering if that artificial influence, one, diminishes your natural response, and if your natural response is far more effective against SARS-CoV-2 because it itself is a more lab-created or lab altered, would be a better way to put it. And even mainstream science is now recognizing that was probably the case. If you want more on that, look at hybridizing harm, my video that tracks all of that, and my last video having to do with mainstream science now accepting that this original SARS-CoV-2 virus was in fact lab created. So this is not small stuff here. There is in here the possibility that vaccines will not work, even though there's a cushion effect, that cushion effect could go down to 50%, 40%, 30% to the point of not being effective, along with the additional possibility that it actually impedes your natural immune response, and therefore a net negative. And we don't know this. We don't even know if they're effective on the larger scale population because we've just done small tests, no animal tests on them, and we've rushed all this through. So that's another factor. If it looks like I'm trying to fall down on the anti-vax part of this, I am not. I'm definitely not on the pro-vax part either. I'm on this middle vax thing, which says be very keen to the evidence, and regardless of what tech you take, weigh the risks and benefits. Do not take my advice as medical advice. Do not simply affect experts or simply be given over to hysteria or conspiratorial thinking either. Really weigh your own risks and see what the variables are here. If you're a young or healthy person, you have a lot less risk from this, all right, than if you're an older person that has underlying conditions. So that's the rational way to address this. Neither person, it just said this, that South Carolina virus identifies the first U.S. case of coronavirus variant first seen in South Africa. We already talked about that. This one did have a history of travel. I think the other one did not. Okay, the other one, the Brazil one, did not have a history of travel. So that's already gotten to community spread. Okay. Oh no. Right. Or is it the other way around? There's no connection between the two people. Okay, no, this one has had local spread already. The other one was travel. The Brazil one was travel. This one appears to have already established a beachhead here, and it's spreading locally, regardless of how it got into the country. Again, this is January 28th. This is only days ago, okay? And these are likely to continue to really spike. So, so here we have it, okay? This is pretty amazing. Vaccine not as effective against South African variant. Again, this is WebMD, not exactly a conspiracy site, but look at this. In a Thursday, and what date is this? February 1st, just a couple of days ago, okay? In a Thursday news release, the company said its vaccine, this is Pfizer, right? is 95.6% effective against the original coronavirus that swept the globe, and about 5% less effective, or 6% less effective against the variant that's 89.3% against the variant detected late last year in the United Kingdom. But the Novavax vaccine was less effective against the South African vaccine. It showed only 60% effectiveness in study participants without HIV and only 49.4% when HIV positive participants were included in the study. So now we're seeing a diminishing of that cushion effect and effectiveness. And we're seeing that people are already immune compromised. HIV is an indication. AIDS itself is a syndrome sometimes associated with HIV, but it means acquired immune deficiency, that something happened to your body that made your natural immune response lower. And that's why opportunistic diseases like pneumonia oftentimes destroyed early AIDS patients, okay? We're having something similar happen here, where vaccines effectiveness are being shown and demonstrated not to be as effective, and even getting below the 50% mark when it came to HIV positive participants. Now, we need to know a little bit more about viruses themselves, really understand what they are. Here I have, and I will do a whole video on these viruses, and I will go ahead and maybe just use this as a preview, okay, to the next one where I discuss different viruses, okay? And the ones that have been out the quickest are these mRNA viruses, okay? That's Pfizer and Moderna, okay? They basically operate, okay, by injecting nanoparticles, lipid nanoparticles, right, that have these little strands of RNA, messenger RNA, that kind of trick the body, right, into creating bits of the coronavirus spike protein, which is supposed to educate your immune system, right, to recognize and go after it, sort of pre-primes it. Now, if those spike proteins begin to change, and they are in these mutations, then this is going to continue to be less and less effective, okay? Now, that Pfizer, they said they're not too bad. They've only lost about 6%. The Novavax is this thing called a protein subunit vaccine, okay? This just gets pieces of the target virus circulating in the system, okay, for the immune system to find and recognize. Instead of using the human body as the vaccine factory, genetically, they engineer insect viruses to infect moths, and those cells then produce the pieces of the coronavirus spike protein, and those are injected into you. The problem with mRNA is that it tricks your body into producing the viruses itself. I think there's a very significant possible autoimmune response. If you're tricking your body into producing foreign proteins and that process becomes unregulated, I think there is some serious chance for autoimmune response there, where your body starts to attack itself because it's creating these foreign antibodies, and it's attacking the foreign antibodies, and then it's losing its ability to distinguish. That wouldn't be such the issue with Novavax, but if you notice with Novavax, its efficacy went down to 60% people without AIDS and less than 50% people with AIDS, okay? The other ones like AstraZeneca are the ones that actually the molecular biologists, evolutionary biologists that I showed in my other video, the one on the mainstreaming of the lab hypothesis of the origination of this virus, Heather Haying, I guess her name is, and then Brett Weinstein, they're the ones that would have recommended AstraZeneca. Again, not medical advice, but she personally would take AstraZeneca over mRNA, because mRNA is a new technology, and we don't know what nanoparticles do to the body. They're very, very small, and they can get into nooks and crannies, and we don't know what they can disrupt by being that small. We don't know about making your body produce these things. This is called a vector vaccine, the AstraZeneca one, and that's coming out now to use another virus to carry the genetic instructions to make the spike protein. This one piggybacks onto adenoviruses, right? A type of common cold virus. They attach it to cells and inject DNA that tells the cells to make coronavirus spike protein. So using the viruses that our body is used to, but then it injects something, right? into cells that tells the cell to make coronavirus spike protein, just the spike part of it, not the whole thing. And then that spike protein is supposed to be recognized, bring the T cells and the B cells and macrophages and leukocytes and whatever in to take care of it and pre-prime the body as the actual coronavirus is coming in with those same spike proteins. Now, again, this is a problem. If those spike proteins are changing and mutating, it may simply not recognize them. Now you've cluttered up your body, your energy, and your immune system with a misdirection or misinstruction. Now it's creating these things, occupying part of your immune system to destroy viruses that you yourself, or virus proteins that you yourself are creating, and leaving yourself more vulnerable because more of your energy and more of your immune attention is directed toward these old viruses that are no longer operative. That's why this is so important. I will go ahead and stop here. Sinovac is trying to create one out of whole killed vaccines. It's a lot slower process, a lot more, I guess you'd say, traditional. All right, but that's what's at stake here. Okay, we can't just technology ourselves out of this, just like we can't technology ourselves out of environmental devastation. We may save energy, we may develop solar technologies, we may develop amazing vaccines, but in the end, we're going to have to come to terms with the fact that science will not be up to the task. It will buy us time, it may save some lives, but we have to change our lifestyles from the bottom up, you and I. We have to become healthier, more environmentally conscious, less warlike with one another, etc., etc. We have to learn to collaborate and reach equilibrium with each other, and that's exactly how natural immunity works. It collaborates and reaches equilibrium with these viruses. We learn to live with each other, and we actually teach each other. They teach us to be more vital. They expand the range, deepen the range of our immune response. We provide a host for them. This happens with herpes. This happens with a lot of different things. We reach equilibrium. And as long as we're not all stressed out and on our health and our sleeping and our mental health and everything is in the right place, that equilibrium is maintained. When we fall out of that, either out of tune with ourselves and our health and out of tune with each other and out of tune with our responsibility and equilibrium with these viruses, then we have a real problem. So that's pretty much all I would like to say about in terms of that. That's my own little editorial, if you will. And I hope this has been helpful. If you'd like, please subscribe down below and hit the bell, and then you'll get automatic notifications of the new videos that I put out. There's a little place there if you want to help fund my research, a PayPal button on my home YouTube channel page that you can actually also support. You can go through the other videos I've done on this, very similar to this one. I've talked about the supplements that work, the lifestyle things that work, segmented nasal breathing, all the things that are going to empower you as a person to raise your level, like I said, to weaponize you in a good and positive way, to address and create a better ability to come into equilibrium, collaborative relationship with whatever virus is out there or whatever challenge that comes to your health. So until that time, this is Citizen Zeus again, signing off, and thank you so much for watching and listening.